This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Steve Lynch. He started playing bass guitar in 1968, but switched over to guitar the day his hero Jimi Hendrix died, September 18th, 1970. He graduated from the Guitar Institute of Technology in 1979, earning the Most Likely to Succeed award. While attending GIT, he wrote the first best-selling book, The Right Touch, a book about two-handed guitar playing. Steve's unique skills launched a storied career participating in a variety of rock bands, including the famed Autograph, and touring the headliners such as Van Halen, Motley Crue, Aerosmith, Ronnie James Dio, Whitesnake, Bryan Adams, and Heart. His band Autograph signed with RCA Records and recorded 3 albums, producing the mega hit Turn Up the Radio and selling more than 5 million copies. Steve also wrote 2 additional instructional books, recorded an instructional video, toured 325 clinics in 20 countries, recorded a solo album, Network 23, owned and operated a music school, and is now in the Rock and Amp Hall of Fame, and his band Autograph in Cleveland, Ohio. He's also having a book released, an autobiography called Confessions of a Rock Guitarist, which was released this month in May with Indigo River Publishing. It's a pleasure to have you on. Hey,
Hi,
Steve.
Catherine. Nice to hear from you again.
I know. You and I know each other for a long time, and it's been a pleasure.
I know. Yeah, absolutely. It's just great to connect up again.
Yes, definitely. Well, there's so much to talk about because, you and I, I'm a big fan of Autograph, but I'm a big fan of you. You're really a creative person, and it's interesting because in the back of my mind, like 15 years ago, I was like, oh, he really needs to write a book. And now finally it's being released. So do you want to start out the interview telling us about this book?
Yeah, the way it started out was, I was always telling people, they were always asking questions about, how did the whole career thing start out with playing guitar and everything that entailed becoming who I became. And so I started telling people about it, and I thought, God, there's so many things to discuss with these people. And I thought, I want to write a book eventually. So I started writing down these one-sentence reminders of all these different things I'd gone through, because as soon as I saw the sentence, I'd know what the story was, and so before I knew it, there was like 200 different sentences written down. I thought, well, that's probably too much, to put in one book, because that's a lot. So anyway, what I did was I condensed it down with the most entertaining and interesting stories. So it's kind of a humorous look at all the different things I've gone through in my life to right up to this point. It's quite a wild ride. I don't do a lot of interviews where I've talked about my whole life, and this is like kind of not only a look of everything I've gone through, but also a look behind the scenes of what actually goes on with the whole record industry, and what to expect and how to be prepared, and all these different things. And it also goes through just like a whole journey of kind of like spiritual enlightenment and everything, that you go through all these different phases. It's a roller coaster ride, and how to ground yourself through the whole thing and how to navigate through it. So it got a lot of different things in it, but everybody that's read it that I've sent out to, to have them pre-read the book before it actually is released, and they've said it's an extremely interesting book, and they loved reading it. So I'm really glad to hear the feedback in that direction.
Wow, well, it's very exciting. I think it's interesting because you started out early on, and in your early career, you look at the music business the way it was being conducted. And now when you look at the music business the way it's being conducted, it's like two completely different worlds, especially the way
Oh,
people receive music, right? Streaming, downloading, all this stuff.
right. There's no actual physical product anymore. It's basically we watched it go through, the records, and LPs, and then we watched it go into beta tapes, and then we watched it go into the 8-track tapes is what I'm talking about. And then we watched it go into cassettes, and then we watched it go into CD, and now it's just all download. So it's all
Yes.
digital.
Well, it's interesting because I love the title of your book, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. I'm sure everyone's imagination is going to go wild just with the title,
Yeah,
So, how did you come
yeah.
up with the title? It sounds so intriguing.
Well, because a lot of the things in there I had never discussed publicly before, a lot of things even privately before. So I thought that this would be a good way to really just kind of, just lay the whole thing out there. Throughout my career, there's been a lot of things that were misinterpreted, as far as my playing technique and all that. And so I just wanted to lay it out for people to see that this is the truth. There's, there's no exaggerations, and there's just the way it actually happened. And so there's a lot of confessions in there that, as far as everything. I mean, as far as drug use that I'd gone through, and how I got started, and what prompted me, and all the ups and downs, the living in a tent and everything, and most people don't know anything about the beginnings, and then even the things that I went through, while in autograph, after autograph, and my traveling all around the world, teaching and writing instructional books and all that. And so it's just an interesting read. That's what everybody says, is this it's fascinating to read. And so that's what I hope. I hope it's a good entertainment for all the readers.
Well, I can't wait to read it. And it's interesting when you say things like that because I start thinking about when you're a young artist, there's so many people around you that are influencing you. It could be a manager, it
Yes.
could be the radio stations, it could be, who's putting on the record in regards to the recording of it. I know you have this two-handed guitar technique that we're going to talk about in detail. But when you started on early, did you have anyone that was trying to coach you to do anything different? Because a lot of times I'll interview someone and they'll say, well, I was really a left-handed guitarist or a right-hand. Like, there's so many things where they felt like they didn't really, well, I changed it because it was easier for the band, or I switched instruments because it was easier for the band. Did you get involved in any kind of hard coaching early on as a young artist?
Well, as you said in the bio intro, I started out playing bass in 1968, but I really wanted to play guitar, but there was a kid on my block that already played guitar. So I said, okay, I'll learn to play bass. And so I did. But then when Jimi Hendrix passed away, I wanted to play guitar. And so I actually traded my bass in, I was 15 years old, and that was it. I started playing guitar, and I started learning Hendrix stuff. And I was just always mesmerized by Hendrix and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page and David Gilmour. And they influenced me on how I bent notes and how I used vibratos and sliding and all the different phrasing techniques that you use. And then around the mid 70s, that's when I saw Harvey Mandel. He played with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, and I saw him do a little bit of the two-handed technique, and I said, oh, what's that? And then there was another guy in Seattle, because that's where I grew up, that had his tapping technique. He did a few things with a couple of fingers on his right hand, and I went, oh, that's so cool. And so I asked him, his name was Steve Buffington, and so he showed me a couple of things. So I played around with it a bit before, and then when I went to the Guitar Institute in 1978, actually, it was March of 1978, I started there. And this guy, Emmett Chapman, who invented the instrument, the stick, which is played with two hands. Your left hand plays the lower notes of 5 strings, which are like in the bass register. And then your right hand plays the higher notes, which is on another set of 5 strings, which are thinner strings. And he plays the chords and the melody lines with that hand. I was so fascinated with this. I asked him, that after he did the clinic, at the Guitar Institute, I asked him, I said, You mentioned in the clinic that you started off on guitar doing this, but then you broke off into this whole different thing where it's like playing on two different sets of strings. I said, what were you doing on guitar before that? And so he said, well, can I see your guitar? So I handed it to him, and he just kind of played this pentatonic pattern with his left hand. And he said, look, you can do it with this hand too. And so this was at the beginning of the school year when I first started going there. So everything that I was learning at the Guitar Institute, I started to write down two-handed, and that includes all the arpeggios, the triads, all the chord inversions, all the different scales and everything. I wrote it out so that you could actually do it with two different hands. So while I was learning the theory, I was writing it down two-handed instead of just one hand. And, by the end of the year, I was pretty much playing with two hands all the time, all four fingers on both hands. So I had this huge stack of papers and of all these different things that I'd written out. And when I played at the graduation ceremony and I played that two-handed stuff, it was in March of 1979. And they said, oh my God, because I played a couple of jazz tunes, and they were really amazed by it, the class and the teaching faculty. And so at the end of it, there was Howard Roberts, who was the one that basically wrote most of the curriculum for the school, and then Tommy Tedesco, one of the premier teachers there. They said, hey, would you be interested in doing a book? And I said, I have enough for easily 3 or 4 books right now with all this material I have written down. So just a couple of days later, they brought me into their publisher, Dale Zdenek Publications, and they introduced me to them, and I played some of the stuff and showed them how to read it. It was all made up out of, circles, squares, and triangles on the guitar neck itself. And so I had it all charted out, and they just went, oh my God, this is really easy to understand. And I said, yeah, it took me a while to figure out how to write it out because it's pretty complicated. But within 10 minutes of meeting him, I had a publishing deal. And so that was my first book. And then later on, I wrote 2 more. But that's how I got into the whole technique. That was it. So
Steve,
that's my story.
yeah, well, that's like amazing. So them getting you involved in writing these teaching curriculum, that was before you even got involved with Autograph. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Years before. Yeah. Actually,
Wow,
this
that's
was,
really impressive. That's
yeah,
very
because
impressive.
I wrote my first book in 78, because that's when I was going to the Guitar Institute. And, I wrote the material for it. And then, in 1979 was when I actually put the book out on it. So, yeah, it was a long time ago. And then Autograph didn't actually really get together until the latter part of 1983. So it was years later.
Oh, yeah. So just when we stay around that period of time with you being at the guitar school, do you remember the guitars that were you using? Because a lot of guitarists actually, they comment on, my first guitar wasn't so great, or I ended up moving into this particular brand or that. Did that impact your technique, or how did the school help you with different guitars?
Well, the main guitar I was playing at the time was a Les Paul. And I also had a Stratocaster. So those were my 2 main ones. But these guitars I actually played in the bands I was in the 70s. I mean, by the time I went to the Guitar Institute of Technology, I had already been a professional player, since 1973. I've been playing to make a living since 1973. So that a time period right there before I even went to the Guitar Institute. That was the time era which defined what type of guitar I wanted to play, and it kind of defined my sound itself. But I would say, the Les Paul was first, and then the Stratocaster came later. But once Autographs started to happen, then I went to Grover Jackson, out of Jackson Guitars. He's down in San Dimas there in California. And we came up with a guitar design that was perfect for me. And so that was it from there.
So for the audience that doesn't know, how did Autograph come together?
Well, what we were was guys that knew each other. Like Steve Plunkett and I played in a band called Looker. Steve Plunkett's the lead singer. So we played in a group called Looker. Then we played in a couple other projects together. Like I played at the tail end of a group that was quite popular called Wolfgang in LA. And that was Randy Rand, the bass player, and Steve Plunkett playing together in that. And Kenny Richards, the drummer, even dabbled in a little bit of that. So we all knew each other. We'd all kind of played in different incarnations together. So we were in rehearsal, we just got together to drink beer basically, and play tunes. We'd play AC/DC songs, we'd play, Queen songs, we'd play all these different songs from different bands, that were popular to us, bands from the 70s. But then we started writing some songs together, and we really liked the way they sounded. And Steve Plunkett knew Andy Johns, the producer who had worked with his brother, with John Lennon and oh God, Led Zeppelin and the Stones, and just the list goes on and on and on. And so we were delighted to have Andy Johns sit on one of our rehearsals, and we played him some of our new stuff. And he goes, "I love this stuff, guys. I've got time down at Gower Studios, right there in Hollywood." And he said, "Let's go in and cut a demo." And so we did. We cut a 5-song demo. And then, we weren't even a band yet. We didn't have a name or anything. We're just kind of doing it on the side because we all were, signed with different labels, playing in different bands, at that point. And so this was just kind of a side gig to have fun. And so anyway, what happened was we went in and recorded that demo. And at that point, Kenny Richards, the drummer, was jogging every morning with David Lee Roth. He'd meet him at his place right off of Sunset Boulevard there, and they'd go jog at 8:30 every morning. And so, David was curious as to what Kenny was doing musically, and he says, "Well, I'm signed to this A&M Records with this group called The Coup, and like I said, and then Steve Plunkett was signed on Columbia Records with a group called Silver Condor. Randy Rand was playing with Lita Ford, and then me and the keyboardist Steve Isham were playing with Holly Penfield on Dreamland Records." And so like I said, we all had deals. But anyway, this jogging with David Lee Roth and Kenny playing in the demo that we just cut, David absolutely loved it. And then when David asked him who was in it, he said, "I was in it." And David Lee Roth knew exactly who I was. And then he said, "Well, who's singing on it?" And he said, "Steve Plunkett." "And who's playing bass?" And it was Randy Rand. He goes, "Oh my God, you know that we used to open up. Van Halen used to open up for Wolfgang, which was Steve Plunkett and Randy." So David wanted us to go out and open up, kind of turn the page there, and all of a sudden, instead of them opening up for Wolfgang, Autograph would be opening up for them, which was a good part of Wolfgang. And so it was kind of turning the tables there. And Kenny called us up and asked us. He said, "Hey, you want to do this tour with Van Halen in 1984?" And we thought, well, we're all done recording with these other projects that we're signed with and everything, so let's go ahead and go out. And next thing you know, we were trying to find a name for the band and rehearsing and writing some more songs and stuff. And we went out and did it. January 18th, 1984 was our first gig. It was my birthday, as a matter of fact. And so we were opening up for Van Halen, and we didn't have a record deal, nothing, just that 5-song demo. And then playing, with them, we were getting all these offers from all these different labels. Warner Brothers and A&M and Geffen and just every Epic Records, everyone you could possibly think of. But it was RCA that offered us a deal backstage at Madison Square Gardens that we really couldn't refuse. And so it was a really good deal. And so we decided to sign with them. And the next thing you know, we did a couple more months with Van Halen. And then RCA pulled us off the tour because they wanted us to come in and start the album. And so that's how that whole thing started.
I love that story. I can't believe that with David Lee Roth jogging around like that. I could see it in my mind.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Catherine, it's the way these things happen. You don't plan it. I mean, we just it just happened that way. We weren't even a band. It just, we thought, well, we'll get together and do a bunch of shows for Van Halen, and it's got to be a blast. We'll just have to come up with a name. So we didn't plan. We already had record deals and everything, so we didn't plan on going out and doing this. We were just going to go play some shows and then come back and play with the bands that we were already involved with. But then we signed a record deal, so we had to quit these other projects and go in and record an album, and the rest is history.
So how did the name come about?
Well, we were on dilapidated old Winnebago, driving from Los Angeles straight across Interstate 10 all the way to Jacksonville, Florida for the first gig. And we're sitting there in the back of it, and we came up with the idea of each of us writing down on a piece of paper 5 different names. And then what we'd do is pass those pieces of paper around, and people would cross out the ones they really didn't like. And at the end of it, there was only a couple left, and it was like Red Cross and Autograph. We thought, well, we can't really call it Red Cross. I mean, come on, we could, but that name's kind of already being used. And so we thought, oh, we'll call it Autograph since we have a unique sound, it's a signature sound. So then we decided on that temporarily, at least. We remember at this time, we're only looking at it like, this is just going to be to go out and have fun and play some shows. We didn't know what was going to happen. And so then when we signed, we just kept the name because we'd already played in front of, hundreds of thousands of people at that point. And so we decided to keep the name, and that was that.
Well, that is the perfect choice for that, because I remember, being a young girl and MTV, and they're like, oh, this song, and then to see the video. So Turn Up the Radio was like, I mean, I was going to high school in the 1980s, and I remember humming that, like sitting in the back of the bus, going to school with that and doodling on my notebook, all of the favorite bands. And they were all, like you said, Van Halen, Autograph. They were like a whole handful of them, the Scorpions, all of those around the same time. They were all kind of hitting it big together. So tell me your experience of like saying, oh no, this is not like a side project. This is it. Like, because you guys had to like all commit. One of the guys in the band, if they didn't want to do it, then you guys would have been like having a situation, right?
Yeah. But, everybody, since we played, together different incarnations before, and we all got along very well. That's the thing about Autograph. The whole time we were together, we got along very well. We were a little bit older. We were like 8 to 10 years older than most of the bands that were making it at that time. We were not spring chickens. And so we'd already played on albums. I've done a lot of studio work and everything. And so we were quite familiar with recording, with writing and all that. So, when we got together and did this, all these other bands, they were more like, we were kind of like just almost like a hired person in the band. We didn't feel like it was our band. You know what I mean? And so when we got together and the camaraderie that we felt when we just jammed together or wrote songs together, we just thought, this is something that's really substantial here. And so when we did get that offer from RCA and then the reaction from the fans and Van Halen crowd, we just thought, this is really magical. We've got to take advantage of this. And so we did, and that's when we decided to quit our other projects and move forward with this. And it's so glad we did. It's so funny too, Catherine, because I got an offer to play with Kiss, and right when we actually went back to LA and signed the official deal with RCA, and I said, can't do it. I just signed a deal, 3-album deal with RCA. And so anyway, they weren't very happy about that because they were like, oh, who turns down Kiss? They went, well, I just did.
That's amazing. I know. That's amazing because Kiss has had different members throughout the years. Of course, Paul and, Gene were, the staple of the whole band. But your fit was probably better in Autograph, don't you think, for longevity purposes? Yeah, I think so too.
The one thing I've always thought is, after going through the Guitar Institute and graduating from there and all that, I thought, I don't want to sell myself out by just being a sideman in a band. I want to be in it from the roots up, from the very beginning, and I want to have 100%, involvement in it. And it would have been, the money that they offered was like, wow, it was really good. But I just going, you know what? But I'm going to take this road because I want to be a part of the whole thing. I didn't want to play some other guitar player's parts, and I knew that I'd have to learn, Ace Frehley's parts. And I thought, my technique is so. I worked on this for years, and I don't want to play somebody else's solo. And so I really kept myself. That was an oath that I made to myself that I will not join a band, and that's why I haven't played with anybody else. Is the fact that I play my own stuff. I have my own technique, and that's it. I'm going to stay true to that. And I've had offers from a lot of bands, but I just don't want to do it. And so it was a fantastic choice that I made to stay with Autograph. I really didn't have a choice because I just liked the 3 album deal anyway, but it was the best decision ever, you know.
Yeah, but
So I'm really happy
I
the
would
way
have to
everything.
agree with that just on the fan level because being a young girl and like sitting down and watching MTV and jumping around the living room to MTV, the 80s were an electric time. And your video, Turn Up the Radio, and there was quite a few videos that these bands were putting out. Not just the songs, but how you guys dressed. I mean, you had the leather going, you had the hair going, you had, the posing with the guitars and stuff. I
Right,
mean, it was amazing. It was like all of us say it was the best time of our life. And if you remove
right,
the
yeah,
music and you remove the fashion, the 80s were like nothing, It was all filled
right,
with
yeah,
music and all
absolutely.
filled with fashion. And so tell me about like having to be on camera, joining these other bands. You may have been playing locally or you may have had gigs and stuff, but you probably didn't have that much film attention at that point. Would you agree?
Oh, most definitely. In fact, MTV, they were still just starting out at that point. This was 1984. So, being on camera, I was a little bit nervous at first, but, I kind of looked at it like, okay, this is my job. This is just what I do, and I really got comfortable with it fairly quick. I've kind of always felt like, okay, let me put it this way. People look at it like, well, how did it feel to do this? How did it feel to do that? And they look at it like, oh my God, being a rock star and all that. And I've kind of looked at it like, well, this is just what I do. I'm a guitar player, and I've been fortunate enough, to have made it this far in my career. But really, it's just the feeling is this is just what I do. It's what I love to do. I don't think about, being popular or anything like that. I just think of it more like this is playing guitar is just my gig. That's just it. So I loved it. I
Yes.
still
Well,
love it.
the
Yeah.
the whole scene, because you probably started to travel a lot more and,
Yeah.
have really big gigs where you start seeing the seats increase in these venues and saying, wow, this is really
Oh my God.
happening, because some of
Yeah.
those
I
venues, they
didn't.
pack them in.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mean to, like downplay it, the way it felt because it was an amazing feeling. We were having the best time of our lives, just going out there and playing. And especially, when like Turn Up the Radio was in heavy rotation, we'd go out, we'd play that, and the audience would go nuts, and you just go, there's just nothing like this at all. I mean, there really isn't. It's like you're up there, and the energy that you feel from the people, and what you're able to get back, you just want to give them your absolute best, and then they scream, they holler, and they just like yelling your names and everything, and man, what a feeling! It's just so exciting. It gets my heart pumping just to think about it right now. It's one of those things where you never experienced anything like it.
Yes. Well,
So that's the
I have to say that, in the summer when I'm driving my Porsche and I have Cirrus on and all of a sudden I hear those few notes, I automatically know it's Turn Up the Radio. I mean, it's just a
right.
couple of notes and you're like, oh, leave it on, leave it on.
Yep, it's like name that tune. It's like you
Exactly.
only need to hear a
Exactly.
couple of notes and that's it.
But not just
Yeah,
that
but
song. There were many songs from Autograph that were really great and very
yeah,
memorable.
we used to write, and we would write for every 10 songs we wrote, we only kept one. You know what I mean? So there was a writing process that we went through. We were pretty meticulous, and we spent a lot of time on the production of them because of the fact that Turn Up the Radio was so popular. A lot of times all the other songs are overshadowed. Of course, that happens with any band. They might have several great songs, but they're usually remembered by only one or two songs. But when I listen back to the Autograph stuff, sometimes I go, my God, I forgot about that one. I haven't heard that one for a long time. Like one of them's Bad Boy. I just go, God, that's such a cool song. And the production on it is so good. And the third album, too, Loud and Clear, that has some amazing songs on it. And it's also that, you know, RCA didn't promote it because they went through, Bob Summers died, the president of RCA. And so Bob Buziak came in and took over. And there was just a lot of changes happening. And it affected the Pointer Sisters, it affected the Eurythmics, it affected, oh God, Mr. There were so many bands, Kenny Rogers. I mean, all these different big names were really feeling the impact because RCA wasn't doing anything with them. And of course, we were down at the lower priorities because we were a new band, and RCA really took a hit, and with all these different bands really felt it, and they were all really upset about what had happened, that they weren't putting any promotion at all into their new releases. And so that happened. And then, of course, what happened after we released Loud and Clear, we did, some more touring after that. Then the grunge thing started coming in, and so that kind of wiped out. It was actually literally wiping out the whole '80s genre, just right off the map. So I think the last one that kind of squeaked by was Guns N' Roses, because they had more of a raw sound. Yeah, but they were like a glam. You remember that they were a glam band back in LA when they first started out, and then they kind of went to this other direction, whereas it was a bit more raw and stuff, which I thought was a great thing for them to do, and they came through in shining colors. I mean, it was a great move for them. But for the rest of the bands that were already established in the '80s, it was pretty much the end for them. That was it.
Yeah, it's very
So
interesting because that's like almost a different time, And RCA
yeah,
was one of the really big labels at the time.
yeah.
So when you were with the label, how much did the band have a say on things? Because I've had some conversations, like a friend of mine is Spencer Drake. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for 25 album covers for artists that have
Uh-huh.
entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. For your album covers or any kind of graphic like that, how much did the band participate in that?
Well, actually, quite a bit. We came up with the whole design for the first album and everything, and we are the ones that picked the songs. You see, they had confidence in us because we had all had a track record of being in the industry for quite a while already and a lot of experience. So it wasn't like we were these new guys on the block. We were seasoned guys. So we had a lot of control on what went on. They would pop into the studio while we're recording, and they'd say, "Oh, okay, sounds good." And then they'd leave, and that would be it, because they knew that we didn't need their presence there. We were completely in control of everything. And so and the other thing is that they were really skeptical about releasing, Turn Up the Radio, and we had to argue about, like, this is Turn Up the radio stations are going to love it, and so they thought, no, send it to me, let's release that one first, that's your most poppy sounding song. And I'm going, guys, can't you see that this is Turn Up the Radio stations are going to love this, the listeners are going to love it. And RCA just didn't have the foresight to be able to see that. And we were really just like in amazement over that. And so, we got it to be the first release and everything, and they weren't even uncertain about it even going on the album. We're going, guys, you see, this is that goes to show you just how much the record companies really don't know. It's just a ridiculous story,
Yeah.
actually.
But think about it. I mean, it's so much kudos to you guys to say that you continue to fight as artists. If you would have just laid down to that and said, okay, you guys may not have had the reception that you received.
Absolutely. Oh, it would have been dead right away, probably. I would imagine. It's like, remember, I don't know if you watched that the Queen movie. I can't remember the name of it, but they're discussing in there about the whole about Bohemian Rhapsody, how the record label absolutely refused to have it on there. It was too long, had too many parts to it, and it just wasn't commercially viable. And so they argued and argued and argued, and it ended up being a mega, mega, mega hit. And so to this day, it's like still a huge, huge song in music history. So that just goes to show you, they knew that they had something. And so they fought for it, and they got it, and they were right. The musicians were right well over the labels. The labels just weren't. They were just looking for the quick buck, and that's the thing, is that's the problem. It's all about commercialization. It's not about the artistry. So when you create something like Pink Floyd used to go through that constantly, because they just did not want to be just a commercial band banging out 45s back in the day. They wanted to create something that was really unique, and that's why they ran their songs together so that they couldn't be played as 45s.
Well, it's true though, and sometimes you can think, oh, they were going to go the safe way, and sometimes the
Right.
safe way is not the best way. So that's
Right.
really
It's like
interesting.
you're taking away what the artist wants to create, or the band collectively wants to create and put out there. And once you do that, you lose the emotion. One thing we never did was just try to curtail every song to be a hit. We had some songs on there that we thought, this might not be that commercially viable, but we're going to do it anyway. Like one song is the last song on our first album, Sign In Please. It's a song called All I'm Gonna Take. That was one that I wrote, it was about the government, and where you're just not going to take it anymore. So Steve Plunkett and I sat down and wrote the lyrics. I already had the music pretty much written out for the whole song. We thought, well, it's not going to be commercial, but you know what? In my royalty checks, that's one of the ones that gets, like the second or the third most radio play outside of Turner for Radio internationally.
Yeah, it's
So
cool.
there you
Wow,
have
it's
it.
amazing. I know. So how did it all wind down with Autograph? Like, how did things start winding down, and how did the band members start thinking, what's next?
Well, what happened was that we were doing demos for Epic Records, because the 3 albums were completed for RCA, but we wanted to go with a different label. We didn't want to renew with them. And so we were looking at Epic. Epic was really, really interested. And so we were doing some demos with them, and they absolutely loved the demos. Actually, a lot of those demos ended up being, in fact, all those demos ended up being on an album called Missing Pieces. That came out in 1997. It was just a collection of demos that we did, basically. At that time, Epic, like I said, the whole grunge thing started to come in. And so Epic said, look, guys, I don't know how we're going to market you, because the 80s thing is gone. And this was like 1988. We were talking to them, 88 into 89. And so they said, we just don't know what we can do with you, because everybody's going to Seattle and signing all these bands up there. And I thought, well, okay, well, that's probably pretty much it for Autograph. And then, we were in rehearsal, and writing more songs. It was like December of like 1989. And we just all kind of stopped. We looked at each other like, are we spinning our wheels here? It seems like the whole thing's just over. I mean, the whole grunge thing's just completely taken over. We're not a part of that. So I just took my guitar off and put it in the case, and I said, I think it's time to call it a day, guys. And they did as well. They said, yeah, I don't think there's anything else we can do. So we just wound it down and shut it down at that point. We thought, maybe we can come back and revisit it at a later time, but for right now, it's not going to happen. And what was sad is that, the 80s thing, the whole music and the whole vibe and everything, the way people dressed, it was all about fun, and that's what I really loved about it, and it was all positive lyrics. This is about partying and having a good time and enjoying your life and everything. And when the whole grunge thing came in, it was more about death, suicide, addiction, depression. It wasn't good. it was like
Yes, it was a completely
like,
different side of the coin. I mean, it
yeah,
was just going from a light energy to a dark energy, for sure.
right. And I understand what they said about grunge, is that it speaks more to the younger generation because this is what they're going through. Well, why do you have to commercialize what they're going through? Okay, let's try to keep it light here, and let's try to cheer them up rather than talking about all the morose things that they're going through in life. But that was my opinion. I guess there was a need for it, but there just seemed to be a real dark, negative energy that came from that whole thing. So.
Yeah, I agree. There were some really good bands that emerged during that time.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah. I loved
honestly, it
Alice in
took me a
Chains. Yeah,
while to catch
yeah,
on, because it was kind of like you said, an overnight process. So if it felt
Yeah.
overnight to those in the music business, for the fans, it felt pretty much overnight as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it happened really fast. That's when I started doing all the clinics and everything because I was actually making more money doing that than I was with autograph, because they were paying me quite a bit to do all these clinics. And I got to see the world, doing those. I mean, 20 different countries. That's a lot of traveling, and 325 clinics. So it was a great, great, great experience. And then, after that, then I recorded my solo album. But then again, when I did my solo album, and I completed that in '95, and when I started shopping it around, nobody wanted to hear it because it was for me, and I had the '80s stigma. Oh, Steve Lynch, guitar player from Autograph. No, never mind. We don't want to hear anything from him. So they wouldn't even listen to it, even though it was completely different from anything I'd done with Autograph. So that was that. It had more modern cutting edge. And if you're associated with the '80s, then you're out of luck.
Yeah, that I understand. I wanted to go back to when you said that you started touring the 20 countries with the clinics. You were going out basically showing them techniques. How difficult was
Yeah.
it, going out and meeting guitarists, or maybe, English is not their first language. So how did the clinics work, or how did the countries kind of do the clinics? How was the scene?
Well, it was promoted mainly through St. Louis Music, and so what I would do is I'd use their amplifiers, Crate amplifiers, and Ampeg amplifiers, and I always mainly used my guitars, but they would have me use West Tone guitars and Alvarez guitars, and so I was promoting those, and also my books. And so what I would do is I'd bring 32 pages out of my books. I had them actually printed out, not the books themselves, with pages from those books, and I'd hand them out. And I'd go through the whole process, and it was mainly about learning that two-handed technique and everything. And then I'd answer questions about, the whole thing about making records and about the business and everything. And there was a really great turnout. I was very surprised. I didn't think anybody knew me outside of America, so it was really refreshing to find out that I had a following for myself, which was really pleasant. So doing that, I just felt really good about doing it because I was educating all these people. And then on the last page that I had in the booklet that I was giving out, it was all about these different books that I was studying at the time. It's all about spirituality. It's all about, really getting your head in the right place to be able to practice and having a positive attitude, and getting a practice schedule together and everything. And they love that. They love those books so much that I've got tons of letters from all over the country sent to St. Louis Music. And then they sent them to me, and it was two big boxes full of letters. And a lot of it was all about what I taught on that last page about, how to get your life, on the right track and everything, and get yourself mentally and physically in tune. And they just absolutely love that. And so and really dedicating to the music, that was the main thing, dedicating yourself to your art. It worked out really cool. I've really had a great time doing that and met some just fabulous people along the way.
That's such an important point, because a lot of times people don't realize that, they feel drawn to play music, but sometimes they don't know why they feel drawn to play music. And
Yeah.
music is like, it heals other people, but some musicians have actually told me directly that playing the music has healed them.
Right, absolutely. It was kind of like my best friend. I mean, the one thing that I could always do, no matter what I was going through personally in life, I could always just grab my guitar, and then that was my zen. It would bring me right down to who I am, and like make me realize this is my priority. This is my saving grace. Is this guitar right here? And so it saved me through a lot of different periods of my life, and I'll forever be thankful for that, to have that.
Yeah, you also founded the Federal Way School of Music in South Seattle, and that was from
Hmm.
2006 to 2000, I guess 16. That was 10 years. So, how
Right.
did you get that to
Before that, I
go?
was. Well, what I was doing is the 10 years before that, I was playing at another, it was a store slash school. And I was teaching there for 10 years and I had, like 70 students a week. And so I was doing really well and I was traveling and everything. And then the owners decided to close that facility. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do with all my students? And what is all these other teachers going to do with their students? So what I did was I found a building and I put my own money into it. I had it all, gutted and everything, and had new walls put in that were acoustically, sound, and put in, different outlets and different air conditioning things. I had all that done in a big waiting room in there, and so I set it all up, and I got the insurances. I got it all done, and it took me 10 days to open it up. So by the time that the other facility closed down, we just brought the students to the new one. No, not one student even missed a day. So it was great. So I kept that going for 10 years. But then, unfortunately, Seattle, I was allergic to Seattle. And not the city itself, but to the black mold up there. And so my pulmonary specialist said, look, I was always getting sick and I felt miserable all the time, just physically ill. And it was because of that black mold. And then plus the fact that there were students coming in that were sick all the time. In Seattle, if you're sick, it's just another day. It's no big deal. You just carry on about your business because of the weather up there. And so he said, you got to move out of here. This is just very, very unhealthy for you. And so basically about 30 days after that happened, then I had my place sold. I had my truck packed up full of my stuff and my car towing behind it. And I drove to Florida. I just thought, okay, I've lived in Fort Lauderdale before, so this time I'm going to try the West Side in Tampa. And that was 9 years ago. So here I am.
Wow, that's really amazing. I give you so much credit though, because that's why I can't wait to get the book, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist, because I mean, you and I know each other, but those that don't know Steve Lynch, he really knows how to ride the waves in his life, and you do it gracefully. I have to say, you really do, and I think you're kind of you identify with spirituality, but you also identify with who you are as a person. And that probably goes all the way back down to when you were a little boy. So I think that's given you the strength to just keep riding the waves.
Well, I moved out when I was 15. Like I said, that whole thing happened with, Jimi Hendrix died, and I decided I'm going to dedicate my life to playing guitar. I was only 15. So I told my dad, I'm not going back to school. I'm playing guitar. I don't need school. And so it was basically, I think it was the eighth grade, yeah, it was the eighth grade because they held me back a year because I only showed up to just a few days of the eighth grade before that because I was always playing. And, my dad found out about that. And so he said, look, if you're not going to go to school, you can't live here. And so I said, Dad, can I borrow the tent that we used to use for camping? And he goes, you can have that old thing. We don't use it anymore. And so I said, great. So I borrowed the tent. He gave it to me, and I went and pitched it at a lot next door to my friend's place, about a mile away from my parents. And I ran extension cables out there so I'd have a little heater for my lamp and for my amplifier and my guitar. And I'm set. This is all I need. So I lived in that tent for a year. And and during the wintertime I had to set the alarm to get out and shovel snow off the tent so it wouldn't cave in. But I was happy. I had my little cot with the sleeping bag on it and everything. And I got a job for $1.25 an hour. I was making speaker cabinets for the stereo place. And so I learned all kinds of things about acoustics and everything working there. And so my life was great, but I had to learn how to navigate through everything from that point on. There was no help from my parents or anything. He said, you're on your own. And like I said, I was only 15. So I just kind of took the reins and rode it. And luckily
Yes.
I made it to this point where I'm at.
That's right. Well,
So,
I'm so pleased that I've had you on as a guest, and I can't wait for everyone to get your autobiography, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. So please plug your social media, let everyone know how they can get in touch with you, hear your music, and also order this book.
well, right now what I have is I have Steve Lynch Facebook, and anybody can go in onto that and follow me. And then I have Steve Lynch official Instagram, also the Autograph website, which has got 36,000 followers. You can go onto that on Facebook. There's also a website that's being built. It's called Steve Lynch, with everything that you ever need to know, how to order the books and everything. Right now I have the pre-order for the books on Facebook. Just like Steve Lynch Guitars, it'll pop right up. It has the 3 links on there on where you can order from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and they also have a bookshop on there. So you can pre-order it from any of those places, and it comes out May 20th. So that'll be available soon. I'll have a link to that also on all my social media that I just mentioned as well.
Wow. Well, it has been a pleasure to have you on, Steve. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you very much, Catherine. It's been a pleasure talking with you again.
Thank you. And turn up the radio.
You got it.
You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium, Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.